It was during the reign of the third Christian king of Jerusalem, Baldwin II, in around 1118, that a band of 9 knights from Europe were alleged to have approached the court of the king. Led by an especially devout warrior from central France named Hughes de Payens, they asked the king for his blessing and support in the creation and the maintenance of a new order of holy warrior monks, their initial intention being to protect travellers and pilgrims to the Holy Land from the robbers and bandits that harried the countryside. Baldwin ruled over one of the largest and most powerful of the Christian Crusader states at the time, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which had been successfully set up in the Levant after the resounding success of the First Crusade at the tail end of the 11th century. Ever since that time, when the mostly Frankish crusaders of that huge venture had unwittingly stumbled into the Levant during a time of civil war and conflict between the leading Muslim factions of the age, Europeans had found themselves the new lords of not just the holy sites of Jerusalem and Nazareth, but also vast swathes of surrounding lands, ranging from numerous rich cities to vast tracts of countryside. Aside from the genuine religious convictions of the mostly Frankish Europeans who had first travelled to the Holy Land during the First Crusade, it was also a time of great opportunity. Baldwin himself, like the previous 2 rulers of Jerusalem, had originally been a minor landless nobleman from France, yet just a handful of years after the First Crusade, he found himself anointed ruler over a vast and rich kingdom. The situation was similar in the other Crusader states of Edessa, Antioch and Tripoli, all of which were essentially new nations, nominally independent from Europe and each other, yet dependent on each other and Europe for financial and military support. As the years went by and the original participants of the First Crusade began to either head back to Europe or reach an age where fighting was no longer feasible, newcomers and pilgrims from Europe became increasingly integral to the long-term survival of the Crusader states, not only for financial reasons, but also for actual military support and manpower. As a result of the First Crusade, significant numbers of Muslims now lived under Christian rule, and likewise, large numbers of Christians had already been living under Muslim rule for hundreds of years prior to this. The complex and often interconnected nature of Christian and Muslim relations during this time is often misunderstood and understated. Nonetheless, by most accounts, the Levant was a wild frontier during this early period in the crusading era. Whilst travel to the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem seems to have been relatively simple for an intrepid pilgrim, any venture outside the city walls of Jerusalem to the other various holy sites of the region usually proved far more problematic. Stories abounded of corpses littering the roads between the various temples, shrines and Christian sites of the region. As pilgrims were regularly robbed and killed, their remains simply left on the side of the road to rot. Those who passed apparently preferred to leave the dead for the vultures rather than risk the same fate for themselves if they wasted precious time in burying them. Upon Baldwin's succession to the throne in 1118, Jerusalem had become bandit country, and something needed to be done to bring the lawless area under control. Hughes de Payens, probably born in France as a minor nobleman in around 1070, had likely seen with his own eyes the first-hand dangers now facing pilgrims. He had likely travelled in the retinue of his liege lord, Hugh, the Count of Champagne, when he travelled on pilgrimage to the Holy Land between 1104 and 1107, and Hughes de Payens seems to have remained in the Holy Land for good after Hugh's second trip between 1114 and 1116. It seems that it didn't take long for Hugh, along with a number of other knights, all said to be family members or close friends, to approach the king with his proposition. The idea had initially been to create a holy order of warriors to protect pilgrims and visitors to the Holy Land, and to a certain extent to police the wilds to protect the weak against the worst deprivations of any opportunistic bandits operating out of the hills. The king enthusiastically put his support behind the order, giving the Temple of Jerusalem into their care. This temple was where they would eventually get their name. Although in recent years the Templars have achieved a unique reputation in history, and indeed in a lore which often ascends above the historical reality into the realms of popular culture and fiction, in reality they were initially just one holy order amongst many that were being founded during this time. This is probably the reason why not a great deal is known about their early years, as they only became more prominent as the years went by and their power and wealth grew. By 1125, Hugh is mentioned for the first time as Grand Master of the Knights Templar, a position which would eventually become one of the most powerful in Europe. As Grand Master, Hugh led the order for close to 2 decades until his death in 1136. During this time, he oversaw the gradual expansion of the order's numbers and wealth. As word of their deeds spread throughout the Christian world, young men flocked from all corners of Europe to join the organisation, which became increasingly multinational in nature. aligned only to itself and its ideals, and its overall service to God and Christianity. In 1125, Hugh's former liege lord, Hugh of Champagne, returned to the Holy Land and himself joined the order under the command of his former vassal. The wealth of the Templars gradually grew as high-status men from all over Europe flocked to donate financial and material aid, seeing this as an easier and quicker way to their own salvation than actually going on crusade themselves. In 1128, Hugh is known to have travelled to England and Scotland to set up Templar houses there and to raise men and money for the order. It seems likely that similar missions were being undertaken throughout Europe during this time. By the time of Hugh's death in 1136, he and his fellow founding members of the Templars had turned their small group of warrior monks into an international powerhouse of an organisation, a private army which formed the backbone of the army of the Crusader states, and would eventually wield just as much power as any of the other dynasties of the Crusader states, and over time, amass a fortune larger than many national economies of Europe. By the 13th century, the Templars, along with the other largest and most famous order of warrior monks, the Knights Hospitallers, eventually became integral to the survival of the Crusader states. After the fall of the last Crusader strongholds in the 13th century and the subsequent perceived lack of purpose, the Templars would eventually fall foul of the covetous and bankrupt King Philip IV of France, who successfully accused the order of heresy, persecuted its members, and promptly swallowed much of its wealth into his own treasury. In the aftermath of their demise, the Templars faded into myth and legend. They still have the power today to captivate audiences.